It's a Tuesday morning, the kind of Tuesday that feels like it was designed specifically to punish you. Fluorescent lights humming overhead, a whiteboard covered in color-coded sticky notes that someone spent 3 hours arranging and that no one will ever look at again. And sitting at the head of that table, arms crossed, reading glasses perched at the absolute tip of her nose like a school principal from a 1980s nightmare, is Marcy. Marcy, who has never once in her professional life said the words "good idea" to anyone who was in her own reflection. Marcy, who schedules 9 a.m. meetings knowing full well the coffee machine on our floor has been broken since February. Marcy, who is, at this precise moment, staring at me across that table with the specific expression of someone who has just decided that my continued existence in this room is a personal inconvenience. I have just finished pointing out, calmly, professionally, with a printed slide deck and 3-sided industry examples, that the campaign we are about to launch for one of our biggest clients is walking directly into a PR landmine. I am talking about a tone problem so obvious that I spotted it during my lunch break. The kind of thing that doesn't just embarrass a client, the kind of thing that trends on Twitter for the wrong reasons. And Marcy's response, her full, considered managerial response, is 4 words. You're not paid to think. She says it the way people say obviously when they want you to feel stupid for breathing. She says it without breaking eye contact. She says it, and then she clicks to the next slide, and the meeting just continues. Like I didn't speak, like I'm furniture. And here's what I want you to understand before I take you back to the beginning of this story. I did not argue. I did not slam my laptop shut. I did not do anything dramatic. I just wrote down 4 words of my own in my notebook. Keep every single email. Because I already knew exactly how this was going to end. I just needed Marcy to keep talking long enough to hang herself with her own words. And trust me, she was very, very good at talking. Let me take you back about 8 months before that conference room moment, because context is everything, and Marcy did not become Marcy overnight. I landed the copywriter job at Pinnacle PR, that's what I'll call the agency, fresh off 2 years of freelance work and a portfolio that I was genuinely proud of. Small agencies are a gamble. Everyone who has worked at one knows this. You're close to the action, you wear 15 hats, and whether the place is heaven or a slow-motion disaster depends almost entirely on one thing: your direct manager. I found out about Marcy on day 3, not from HR, not from any official onboarding document. I found out because one of the junior account managers, a quietly exhausted woman named Priya, pulled me aside near the printer and said, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Whatever you do, don't pitch ideas in front of clients. She hates it. Do it through her or don't do it at all." I remember thinking Priya was being dramatic. I remember smiling and saying something like, "Noted, thanks." I was wrong to think that. I owe Priya an apology. Marcy was the creative director and de facto queen of the agency. The founder, a guy named Gerald, had semi-retired 2 years prior and basically handed Marcy the keys while he took long lunches and attended conferences where people clapped for slideshows. He trusted her completely. This was, it would turn out, Gerald's primary character flaw. Under Marcy, the agency ran on a very simple operating principle. Her instincts were correct, and everyone else's instincts were interference. She had been in PR for 22 years, and she wore those years the way some people wear a championship ring, constantly, aggressively, in situations where it wasn't relevant. She did not have a creative process so much as she had a creative decree. She would walk into a room, announce the concept, and then the rest of us would execute it. Copywriters wrote the copy she described, designers built the visuals she sketched on a Post-it note, account managers delivered her decisions to clients as though they were divine scripture. Anyone who deviated, who suggested an alternative, who flagged a problem, who asked so much as a single clarifying question at the wrong moment was immediately cataloged in Marcy's mental filing system under the tab labeled "Not a Team Player." And once you were in that tab, things got uncomfortable fast. There was Marcus, the senior copywriter before me, gone within 6 months, restructured, they said, which at Pinnacle PR was a word that did a lot of heavy lifting. There was a graphic designer named Tony who had the audacity to suggest that a logo color scheme felt dated. She lasted 4 months before she quietly disappeared. There was the account manager who CC'd a client on an internal email by accident, not Marcy's email, just a general planning thread, and spent the next 8 weeks being assigned every miserable administrative task the office had available until she finally quit on a Friday afternoon and never came back. I watched all of this. I took notes, not literally, not yet, but mentally. I understood the ecosystem, and for the first 5 months, I played the game. I wrote clean, effective copy. I hit every deadline. I brought ideas to Marcy privately, in one-on-ones, framed as thoughts for her to consider rather than pitches. She liked that. It gave her the ability to adopt your idea, present it as her own, and experience zero cognitive dissonance about it. I told myself this was fine, this was professional, this was how you survived. And for a while, it worked. My copy went out the door, clients responded well. I got a nod from Marcy in a team meeting once, which in Pinnacle PR culture was essentially a standing ovation. But then came the Harlow account. Harlow was a mid-sized lifestyle brand. Think upscale home goods, the kind of company whose Instagram is all linen tablecloths and artisanal candles. They had brought Pinnacle PR on to manage a product launch campaign, and it was a big deal. Big enough that Gerald came back from one of his long lunches to sit in on the kickoff call. Big enough that Marcy was in a genuinely good mood for almost 48 hours, which was unsettling for everyone who had forgotten what that looked like. The campaign concept Marcy developed was built around a nostalgia angle. Home is where the story starts. Warm visuals, copy that leaned into memory and comfort, and the idea of gathering. Fine, solid, nothing revolutionary, but functional. The problem, and this is the problem I would eventually bring to that Tuesday conference room, was the specific language Marcy had drafted for the social rollout. There was a line, a single specific line in the campaign tagline framework that I promise you, if you had shown it to any editor, any social media manager, any person who had spent more than 40 minutes online in the past 3 years, would have immediately flagged as a phrase that had been co-opted by a very specific political internet subculture. Not in an obvious way, but in a "you will absolutely be in the screenshots" way. I saw it immediately. I stared at it for a long time. I did the research. I compiled 3 examples of brands that had stumbled into the same trap. I prepared my talking points. And then I walked into that Tuesday meeting and presented them. And Marcy said, "You're not paid to think. You're paid to write what I tell you." And here's the thing I haven't told you yet. She didn't just dismiss me in that meeting. After everyone filed out, she pulled me aside in the hallway, smiled, and said, "And I want you to hear this clearly. I'd be careful about the kind of impression you're making in rooms like that." It wasn't a threat, exactly. It was something worse. It was a warning delivered with a smile, the kind of smile that means, "I have been doing this for 22 years, and I have outlasted everyone who ever challenged me, and you will be no different." And for exactly 4 seconds, I almost believed her. Here is the decision I made walking back to my desk that Tuesday afternoon. I was going to comply, completely, perfectly, enthusiastically even. Marcy wanted a writer who did not think. She was going to get exactly that. She wanted copy produced exactly as specified, delivered on time, with no unsolicited feedback, no gentle redirections, no quiet little saves that she would never acknowledge anyway. Absolutely. Done. With pleasure. But I was also going to document every single instruction I received, every email, every Slack message, every directive delivered verbally that I would then follow up on in writing with a "just confirming per our conversation, you'd like me to proceed with X as written." Not because I was being passive-aggressive. I want to be clear about that. I was being extremely, deliberately, almost surgically aggressive. There is a difference. I pulled up my email, I created a folder, I labeled it, and I want you to appreciate the bureaucratic poetry of this title, "Per Your Direction." And then I got to work. The Harlow campaign launched 3 weeks later. The tagline went out exactly as Marcy had written it. The social copy went out exactly as Marcy had written it. I wrote what I was told. I submitted it. I got her sign-off in writing. Looks good, send it. And I filed that email in the folder. For the first week, nothing happened. Harlow seemed fine. The campaign got some engagement. Marcy walked around with that particular energy she had when she felt vindicated. Then, a mid-sized cultural commentary account picked up the tagline. Not in a big way, in a, does anyone else notice this way? The kind of quiet observation that sits at around 300 likes and then gets picked up by someone with more followers, and then someone with even more followers. By day 10, Harlow's social team was emailing our account manager in all caps. I watched this happen from my desk. I watched the account manager, a guy named Derek, who had the permanent look of someone bracing for impact, go pale and pick up his phone. I watched him walk very quickly toward Marcy's office. I watched the door close. I opened my folder and added the latest email chain to it. I went back to writing the copy for our next campaign, a regional grocery chain, exactly as specified. Marcy came out of her office 30 minutes later. She did not look at me. She walked to the kitchen, refilled her coffee, came back, closed her door again. Derek materialized at my desk like a ghost. "Did you know about the Harlow thing?" he asked. "I raised a concern in the strategy meeting," I said. "I was told to proceed as directed." He stared at me for a moment. Then he nodded, slowly, the way people nod when they're processing information they really didn't wish they had. "Okay," he said. "Okay," I said. He walked away. I added our brief conversation to my mental notes. Then I kept writing. What I didn't know yet was that Harlow wasn't the only accounts where this pattern was playing out. There was a second client, a nonprofit campaign, where Marcy had made a similarly unmovable call on messaging strategy. I had flagged it. I had been overruled. And while I was watching the Harlow situation quietly ignite, that second campaign was already soaking in gasoline. I just didn't know it yet. And neither, still, did Marcy. The nonprofit was called Meridian Community Partners. They ran youth programs. Good organization, genuine mission, the kind of client that an agency takes on partly because it looks good in the portfolio, and partly because some of the people working there actually care. The campaign was a fundraising push, end-of-year giving drive, emotionally driven copy, stories from program participants. The brief was solid. The strategy, in outline, was fine. Marcy's execution, however, had a problem. The imagery and language framework she had approved leaned heavily on a particular kind of poverty narrative, the kind of rescue framing, the positioning of donor recipients as passive beneficiaries of donor generosity rather than as active community members with agency. It's a subtle thing, but it is a documented thing, and Meridian's own communications director, a sharp woman named Claudette, had mentioned in an early call that they were specifically trying to move away from that framing. I had written notes on that call. I had flagged Marcy in the document with a comment. She had deleted the comment and written, "This is standard fundraising copy. Proceed." So I proceeded. I will tell you that the copy I wrote was technically excellent. Every sentence landed. The emotional arc was clean. It was some of the best work I had produced at Pinnacle, which made the whole thing feel even more like a slow-motion tragedy. The campaign went out. Claudette's team received it. They were not pleased. The feedback came through Derek again, routed back to Marcy. Claudette had referenced the exact conversation from the early call, the one where she had specifically said what she didn't want. She was professional about it, but she was clear, and she was disappointed in a way that felt significantly worse than if she had just been angry. Marcy's response, which I know because Derek was not great at keeping his voice down and his office was not far from mine, was to suggest that Claudette didn't understand her own audience. I took a breath. I opened my folder. I added the flagged document with the deleted comment to it. I added my email confirming the direction to proceed. I added Derek's response thread. Then I went to get a glass of water, because what else do you do? By the end of the following month, both Harlow and Meridian had given notice that they would not be renewing their contracts with Pinnacle. Gerald, who had theoretically been semi-retired, but apparently still read the financial reports, had sent an email to Marcy asking for a call. A very short email, the kind of email where the brevity is the entire message. I know about that email because Marcy forwarded it to the entire senior team, asking us to prepare a summary of recent account performance challenges, which was an interesting way to ask the people she had been overruling for months to help her explain why things had gone wrong. I started writing my summary. It was very thorough. I want to pause here and tell you something I almost didn't include because it makes me sound either very calculated or very petty, and honestly, I'm comfortable with both descriptions. The night before I submitted my account summary, I sat at my kitchen table and read through every email in my folder, every confirmation, every proceed as directed, every deleted comment and replaced draft. And I realized, sitting there, that I had built something. Not a trap exactly, more like a very detailed, very accurate map of every decision that had been made and by whom and when. And I thought about Priya's whisper near the printer 8 months ago, and I thought about Marcus and Tony and the account manager who CC'd the wrong person. And I thought, this folder is for all of us. The account summary I submitted was 12 pages. Marcy had asked for a paragraph. I sent 12 pages, formatted, cited, with a timeline and an appendix. I sent it to Marcy, and I BCC'd HR, not because I had been told to, because I had spent enough time in that office to know that documents that only go to Marcy have a way of being substantially edited before they reach anyone else. The BCC is a beautiful tool. Use it wisely and sparingly, and with surgical intent. Within an hour of submitting the summary, I got a meeting invite from Marcy. No subject line, just my name and hers and a time slot the following morning. I accepted. I printed a copy of the summary. I printed the email folder index. I put them in a manila folder, because if you're going to do something, you do it with physical documentation and a manila folder, like a person who means business. The meeting the next morning lasted 6 minutes. Marcy was already in the conference room when I arrived. She was holding a printed copy of my summary. I could see from the doorway that she had annotated it in red pen. There was a lot of red. I sat down. She looked at me across the table for a moment. Same table, same fluorescent lights, same burnt coffee smell. "This is not what I asked for," she said. "I asked for a summary of recent account performance challenges," I said. "I provided a full account of the decisions that shaped those campaigns, the internal communications around those decisions, and a timeline of client feedback. I wanted to make sure the record was complete." "The record," she repeated, like the word tasted strange. "I've been keeping detailed notes since our conversation in this room about the Harlow campaign, the one where you told me I wasn't paid to think. I wanted to make sure that if performance questions came up, there was a clear account of which directions came from where." Something moved across Marcy's face. It wasn't quite anger. It was more like the specific expression of someone who has just realized they have been holding a live wire. "You need to be very careful," she said. Quiet. Same voice as the hallway warning. Same smile starting to form at the edges. "I have been very careful since August." I put the manila folder on the table between us. I did not open it. I'd like to flag that I also BCC'd HR on the summary, just to make sure it was properly received. The smile stopped forming. "She went to HR before I did. I know this because one of the coordinators, a kind, tired woman who had been at Pinnacle since before Marcy arrived, stopped me in the corridor that afternoon and said very quietly, 'They're going to want to talk to you at some point. When they do, bring whatever you have.' 'How much time do I have?' I asked. She glanced back down the hallway. 'A few days.' 'Okay,' I said. I went back to my desk. I forwarded the complete contents of my per your direction folder to my personal email. I checked that all attachments had transferred and made a second copy on a personal drive. Then I went to HR and scheduled time for the following day, proactively, before they came to me. Because here is something important about navigating situations like this. The person who controls the framing of events is usually the person who shows up first with documentation. I was going to show up first, with documentation, in a manila folder, looking like someone who had been prepared for this conversation for months, because I had been. The HR conversation lasted just under 2 hours. I walked them through the folder chronologically: the Harlow campaign flag, the dismissal, the email confirmation to proceed, the Meridian copy notes, the deleted comment, the direction to proceed, the account summary submission, the BCC. I did not editorialize. I did not perform outrage. I just narrated what had happened in the order it had happened, with the corresponding documentation for each item. About 40 minutes in, the HR lead, a measured, quiet man named Sam, who I had genuinely never spoken to at length before, asked me, "Was this the first time something like this happened, where you flagged a concern and were told to proceed regardless?" I looked at him. "No," I said. "Would you like the other examples?" He nodded. I turned to the appendix. I found out 3 weeks later through Derek, who found out through the office coordinator, who had apparently been waiting for this specific outcome for considerably longer than I had. Marcy was being restructured, the word they used, at Pinnacle PR, where restructuring had eaten Marcus and Tony and the account manager with the wrong CC. That word was finally being applied to the person who had invented it as a weapon and then handed it out like candy for years. She was given a transition timeline. She was not walked out by security. There was no dramatic scene. The creative director role was quietly absorbed into a restructured team framework, which, honestly, was its own kind of irony. And one morning, Marcy simply was not in her office, and her nameplate was gone from the door, and her red penned annotations on my summary only existed in my personal archive. Derek told me the news in the kitchen, speaking at full volume for the first time in the entire period I had known him, because the thing about a tyrant being removed is that the people who have been whispering for years suddenly remember what their regular voices sound like. Priya, near the printer, caught my eye across the office. She nodded. I nodded back. Gerald sent a company-wide email about exciting leadership transitions and the next chapter of Pinnacle's creative vision. It was 4 paragraphs of corporate warmth. It mentioned Marcy's 22 years of contributions. It did not mention the Harlow account, or the Meridian campaign, or the 12-page summary, or the BCC. That was fine. I did not need it to. I went to my desk. I opened my Per Your Direction folder. I archived it. I did not delete it. I want to be clear about that. You never delete the folder. You archive it, and you keep it somewhere safe, and you remember that it exists. Because here is what Marcy never understood, and what I think a lot of people in positions of unchecked authority never understand. The quiet ones in the room are not necessarily the ones who have given up. Sometimes they are the ones who are paying very close attention, taking notes, confirming directions in writing, building, slowly and methodically, a complete and accurate record. You told me I wasn't paid to think. I stopped thinking for you. I thought for myself instead. And it turns out that was an extremely productive use of my cognitive resources. If this story hit the way it was supposed to, drop a comment below. Tell me about your Marcy. Tell me about your folder, or the folder you wish you'd started. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. We're here every week, turning the best of Reddit's workplace warfare into something worth 30 minutes of your day. We love you. Stay documented out there.